So I have here Yadira Escobar, and I want her to explain a little bit more about this novel. That it's already in Amazon. You can acquire it.
Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here on your show. It's a chance to speak some English and to add the RMI, try to inject a little bit of a different flavor because, well, yes, you mentioned Moderna. Moderna, since it's in Spanish, it has its own flavor and its own tendencies. But right now, being on your show and having the opportunity to speak to your listeners, through shortwave or online because we will
or internet.
Yes, yeah, exactly. We're going to publish the video online, and it's a great opportunity to talk about the book because I think that journalists have a great tool in their hands, and since you have your show, it's a great opportunity for just giving a voice, giving a chance for all those struggling artists. Because I know you invite singers, and thank you so much for giving me the chance to talk about the book, which is led by a female protagonist. And I know that's a bit tricky. I mean, lately Hollywood has been kind of trying that out to bring in a bit of diversity to their movies. But I know that female protagonists have one little issue, and it's with a certain part of the male population when they start getting all skeptical and they say, oh, but that's like so unrealistic. When you see, they argue that some 100-pound girl can overtake a man who's 200 pounds. So that's something that I try to bear in mind. And it helps that I have a lot of brothers.
A superhero.
Exactly. Yeah. So,
like Angelina Jolie in all those movies, that.
Sure. Yeah.
She can fight 10 guys at the same
time. Exactly.
But
then you have Atomic Blonde, where the directors, a recent movie where they tried to make the female protagonist do certain fighting techniques that would be credible.
Right.
Because like you want to appeal to the female audience, which is very independent nowadays and going to the movies and reading a lot of books, but you don't want to offend the male mentality while
the macho mentality.
Exactly, the macho mentality by giving them a female that's unrealistic. And I think also that when you put a female protagonist to just emulate the male conduct, you're not really helping females at all, because that's something that feminism has a problem. There's no point in trying to become the new men. Mm-hmm. It's in trying to carve a place for yourself. And like, I didn't want Rachel, the protagonist, to just be a drunken man who sleeps around and just curses all the time. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to have that negative aspect that some modern heroes have. And I think that's a cheap attempt to try to create realism. No, I wanted a female protagonist that respects and reflects a sort of attainable greatness that any young girl in the audience can say, you know what, I feel identified with that. That's realistic. It's an attainable thing. Mm-hmm. And again, she's not perfect because she struggles to maintain her decency in an authoritarian regime, which is kind of scary. It's kind of scary how the United Nationalist Party that controls her world, mainly Miami, is somehow becoming more mainstream. You know how politics has become so toxic lately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very realistic character. I mean, I read it. It's not. It doesn't show the main character, Rachel, as somebody being out of this world or a superhero or a supergirl. She's just a normal girl, a normal woman, and she has to face the reality of living in a country where everything is upside down, where the political party has changed everything 360 degrees. When I started reading the book, I'm going to give away a little bit just the beginning.
Spoiler alert!
The president of the United National Party, which is the one that is the president of the United States at that time, the ruler of Florida.
Yeah, they've displaced Florida both parties.
Becomes like independent from the United States. It's no longer part of the United States. It's like an independent republic. And he's like extreme right, like a little bit like Hitler, not quite, but pretty much a little bit like him. And he has the whole book starts because he has a daughter, and the daughter doesn't have the same political beliefs that he has, and somewhat she has her own group, and that's why in the whole book, the whole thing of the book, he wants to recruit the daughter of his most important adversary, and make him work for him, and try to finally get her to have his same political ideas. Now, what really gets me about the book, and is that the hook, the thing that made me keep reading, and I read it in about 6 days, is that at the beginning of the chapter, they describe this girl, but then the girl doesn't really appear in this book.
Right, because
Yes.
the thing is that the whole story, our listeners should bear in mind that this is a prequel to an independent movie that
Right.
my family and I, yes, a family in South Florida, tried to do a movie on their own. It was basically a post-apocalyptical film that is still in post-production. You know how it is when
Right.
you have limited budget. A project can drag on and on.
Right.
So in this book, as a written prequel to that movie, try to not only predict but also warn, like not just describe what is going on, but also warn. And as I was mentioning to you earlier, that it's kind of scary how since 2010, which is when we first conceived the idea, America has slowly gone down the path that we thought was basically impossible. And even though I like countries that are very proud of their identity, I love patriotism, and I respect a lot of the conservative values that are now being identified exclusively only to the Republican Party. The reality is that I don't think that communism will ever be a driving factor. I mean, a lot of right-wingers, they try to always promote terribly extremist policies while frightening their constituents against communism. But communism isn't going to take over America. And I think that as long as they're using the boogeyman of communism, the ghost of Stalin, there are a lot of people in this country, bad policymakers, in the pockets of certain terrible lobbyists. They're kind of sacrificing the most beautiful things that make America a beautiful place to grow up in, because I love that America that embraces its true colors. I mean, it's kind of terrible to now try and change the identity that it has. And Rachel is kind of trying to survive. I kind of hint at what's her religion, like what's her ethnic background, but I try to keep away from that. Like if you notice, Rachel doesn't have a last name, because I know that last names create division. Rachel doesn't tell you what her religion is specifically because she knows how religion divides people. Rachel doesn't even tell you the most extreme manifestations of her character that we know could end up in death, because people have been burned for religion and people have been burned for politics. And so she's trying to kind of find her way and not betray her principles in the middle of a very hyper-nationalistic revolution. Because, right now, you have a president that openly said that he's a nationalist. Mm-hmm. But back in 2010, this was inconceivable, and so it's shocking. And we didn't do Mr. Rivero to look like Trump, but it's scary how it's kind of turning it's turning into Trump.
So you had like a sixth sense.
I even had a friend. I even had a friend who said, "If you knew this was going to happen, then why did you vote for Trump?" It's like, but that's why you see, we put in the book, in the original story, that Florida is trying to gain its independence.
Right. Well, it does actually.
Yeah, it does, but it struggles and it backfires, and then they're being sanctioned for it, because I think that even though patriotism or nationalism can have very positive traits while trying to conserve a country's culture and all that, the reality is, if you take it too far, if you just become an extremist, you're going to end up justifying the fragmentation of this country. Right. Because America just can't go down that 20th century Hitler or Franco or Mussolini path of hypernationalism, because that's not the nature of this country. And even though there are grand institutions in America, even though there's a great separation of power, it's not good to take them for granted and say, please, that's never going to happen in America. We have institutions that will stop that. Well, yes, but you don't want to get too cocky about it. Don't be so arrogant. Keep in mind that any country can lose its way and go down the wrong path and end up crushing people's basic human rights.
Right. Let me ask you something. What parts of
and the girl that you mentioned, well, I didn't mention her in the end because she was just like a hook to let you understand why Mr. Rivera has a fixation on Rachel, that he has an obsession because he wants to change her political standing, because that's what's terrible about political intolerance. You know, because a lot of people, they'll brag that, I respect your liberty of expression. But then when you say something that they don't like, then they want to shut you up immediately. And, you know, there's so much contradiction in that mentality.
I don't want to give the book away.
Yes, please. But not too many spoilers.
But he doesn't succeed in that. Rachel doesn't go to...
he manages to corrupt her somehow.
No,
because you know there are ways of coercing someone.
There's a lot of temptation, but she doesn't go for it. Not 100%.
No, she doesn't. She joins, but she even there's a point in which
she's trying to play the game.
She does, yeah. She's at one point she thinks
like a
that
cat and mouse thing.
Yes,
that's what keeps me and it's going to keep the readers.
Rachel at one point even fancies that she can become an insider, and from the inside of this authoritarian regime, implement change. Like she fancies, all right, so I'm technically inside the monster. How about I try and steer them towards a more centrist position? But that doesn't work because sometimes it's kind of impossible to find the beautiful aspect, to kind of like even pointless to try to find the redeeming parts of certain ideologies that we just have to bury. We have to forget it. Like, no, you just can't resuscitate that. You can't redeem it. It's just bad. You know, just throw it away. We're capable as human beings of creating better types of governments. We can have better politicians than those that try to just divide us, to use scapegoating tactics. Like when they target minorities. Instead of really fixing, for instance, our infrastructure problem.
The way that I see this book, besides the fact that it's a novel and it's science fiction, it's a sort of a warning of what could happen in a country if it goes to that extreme. I mean, everything is possible in politics, and you know that. It's total fiction. Freud is not part of the United States, but it is understandable under human conditions in any country that could happen, and it has happened, and it is happening.
It is happening,
yes.
In
different countries. Now, how much of you is in this character, Rachel? Because I want to know, because writers usually, when they write a novel, they subconsciously they put
and
part
artists
of their
too. They tend to paint themselves.
And I know that as a fact, so that's why I'm asking you what do you have is similar with Rachel, and what do you have that is different from Rachel?
I'd say that, well, every character in the book is in one way a part of me. I mean, even the negative characters, when you're creating a work of fiction, even the people that you dislike, you have to put yourself in their mind and kind of think like they would. And so, like, even the dark aspects could, in one perverse universe, even be you. If I were to turn into a bad person, I might be the fascist Mr. Rivera. But I'd say that what Rachel and I share is the fact that she's struggling in a very intolerant Miami because of my centrist, kind of very independent way of being. You know, everything that I say concerning Cuba and even concerning Miami is usually met with a lot of hostility from people that claim that they respect human rights and freedom of expression, but then they say that, you know, I can't talk. I mean, I've suffered. Maybe it's in part because I'm a female. I mean, I know that women who are exposed out there, and when they want to think for themselves, it's just an invitation for hostility. And the reality is that a lot of my haters are male. And the thing, you know, even though I'm actually one of the people that is out there trying to say, let's not divide the sexes. Let's reconcile our differences. Let's talk. I'm all for dialogue. I think that it's wonderful when the other side can even convince you of something that you held as your true belief. You know, okay, so you say, the other side, that I'm wrong about this. You know, let me see the light. Convince me otherwise. But Rachel, like me, is kind of struggling in that world where she's constantly trying to speak her mind, but then she knows that it's going to have consequences. And I think it's just terrible when you have a part of the population beginning to censor themselves, because that leads to being complicit, and you just end up sometimes out of fear justifying or silently approving of certain things that if you were being brave, you would never approve of. And I think that staying silent in the face of injustice is really terrible, and it degrades the person, not just the person who does the injustice, but the person who accepts it, basically. But
Right.
I say also that Rachel is trying to look at the best in both sides. I mean, she's constantly trying to put herself in the other person's shoe, and that's something that I do a lot because of, like I said, I mean, I believe in dialogue. I think
Right.
that it's important to understand what the other side is feeling. Like if I see even a white supremacist or even a jihadist, doesn't mean that you're going to accept it. Of course, it doesn't mean that you're going to comprehend it completely, but you need to know. And I think that the worst that can happen to our civilization is when people just shut themselves off. They close themselves off, and they create a caricature of what you are. You just say, I like turtles, and then they immediately construct a whole fantasy about you, and then they don't want to learn. They don't want to know what you're saying. They don't want to know who you are, what you're proposing, and that's terrible. The minute that we stop listening to one another and putting ourselves in each other's shoes, that's when you say, well, I don't recognize you as a human being anymore, so I'm going to murder you. That's what it leads to. If you don't recognize, if you don't accept, if you don't try to understand the other side, it's so easy to just say, oh, let's just kill them off,
Right.
Just shut that voice
Right,
off,
right.
We're so much better here with agreeing with ourselves.
Right.
And not learning.
And not learning.
Not progressing.
Right. What puzzles me, what really I don't understand. I mean, I do understand it, but it took you years to write this book.
Oh my goodness, yes. Almost 4 years, I think.
But the film was done before the book. Am I right?
Yes, the film began in 2010, and the book, I think I started in 2015.
But the film, I was talking to you before we were off the air. The film and the book are not precisely the same.
No, the book, it kind of shows you how this happened, how
Right.
these horrible people came
Right.
to power. And I actually think that the book more relevant to what's going on right now.
Right.
Because there are many people that are unsatisfied, that they're angry with what's happening to this country, what's happening, what they see on the news. And I think that instead of just like sitting back and just being surprised or angry or horrified, I think that people need to remember that if you don't like something, you can talk to your congressman, you can call a senator, they're not going to pick up the phone for you, but you can bombard them with letters. You can find them on Twitter. Nowadays, it's never been so easy to contact your local politician and say, what are you going to do about this? I don't like this bill. And instead of just going online to criticize the one or two things that Donald Trump or whoever might have said on Twitter, people need to go back to the real policy. Like if they don't like what's happening to healthcare, actually sit down, study what is a real option that doesn't just make these companies, these corporations, doesn't let them keep getting rich and actually lets people have access to healthcare.
Okay, that's in the real world.
That's in the real world,
but
yes.
But in the book, the book, what it represents is the chaos that could happen if
if we let them advance without
right,
doing anything.
if the people that get into power are go to that path, that extreme path of dictatorship, and there's a lot of horrible things that
Yes.
happen in the book. Like there's poverty, people don't have food,
Diseases,
diseases,
Nepotism.
There's a lot of action in the book because there's bombs, there's guns, there's people that are murdered, trying to be murdered. I see it in a film, and I see it in the novel. the novel gets to you. It's you become addicted to it in a very.
That's great. That's
I
great.
don't know if that's the right word to describe it, but you get addicted to the book. You want to read it. You want to know what's going to happen, and you get so involved in the book. See, what happened to me was when I got to the last chapter, I said, it's over. There's no more. I want more.
That's nice.
Yeah, what happens after that?
Right.
I mean, what happens after the last page?
Right.
It keeps you wanting for more, which is good.
Well, then maybe I should write a second part.
For a movie, when the person reads the book, sees the film or whatever, and then he says, "I want more."
Right.
That tells you that it was good. And
Thanks.
so that's why I recommend it. It's in Amazon, right?
Yeah, you can find it at Amazon.com.
You can buy the digital one, or you can buy the
print, yeah.
the print one. And let me show it again for us people. I recommend it. The illustrator, this beautiful woman, and that's you. That's Rachel. But actually,
That's also Rachel.
but
That
actually-
was a
But
photograph.
actually, it's Yadira Escobar.
That's a photograph of me while I was portraying Rachel. Because yes,
Okay.
in our movie, I
Right.
do play the part of Rachel.
And you also acted in the movie.
Yeah, exactly.
You are Rachel in the movie.
Yeah, that's
So
why
you're also an actress.
it was yes,
You see why-
multitasker.
why I
Yes.
said that there's a lot of multitasking in your
Yeah, that's
personality
why.
and
While we were doing the movie, that's the reason why I really wanted to write down, because there were so many things left unanswered that I really wanted to explain. How could this happen? How could we fall into an authoritarian regime like that? And you mentioned the violence, and that is a crucial element. These horrible events can always justify the coming of any sort of authoritarian regime. So that's why I'm a little afraid that we might not be prepared for an unexpected event. If let's say that now we go into a war with China or Russia, or John Bolton decides to invade Brazil or whatever. If or if Yellowstone erupts. I don't know if right now people that are just so dependent on social media, on their fun apps and applications, automobiles, people that have become a little too self-absorbed and just satisfied with the current level of the current life standard that we have. Can they survive? Can they respect the same principles from the past that made America strong in the face of uncertainty, in the face of war? I mean, if you get a person right now, 21st century man, and you put him during the Second World War, they'd freak out. I don't think that they're capable of defending their country the way that older generations did.
Right.
And because some people, obviously there are still many wonderful people out there, but a lot of kids nowadays, and I don't want to sound like a grumbling reactionary, but a lot of kids nowadays, they might feel that they're liberal and all that, and that they hate Trump or whatever because he says stupid things on Twitter. But in the face of war or famine or disease, will they still respect human rights? Will they still, this current generation, will they still defend the separation of powers? Or will they suddenly turn to a daddy figure that will just save them from suffering?
Right.
That's what's scary, because any small new event could justify the coming of a party like the UNP.
Yes, definitely. That's why I say that the book is a warning.
Yes, you're right.
It is a warning. Well, almost the co-producer who is telling me that we're almost finished. We don't have more time. But the book, you can get it at Amazon. I highly recommend it, and I know that it's going to sell a lot. I can be sure that this book is going to have a very good response. It's always a pleasure having you, Yadira Escobar.
Thanks. It's always a pleasure coming here.
Okay?
Yes.
And I hope that we can talk about the book after we sold about 3 million copies again. I'll invite you to the show.
Yeah, you do that, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, and until next week, ladies and gentlemen.